Good morning. My name is Maurice Crespi. I'm the managing partner of Schindler's Attorneys, and Schindler's are the co-founders of COBRA. COBRA is South Africa's largest pro bono initiative. The idea behind COBRA is we help businesses, companies, entities. Today we're going to hear about community schemes. We're going to hear about body corporates. COBRA is very, very much part of that. So today we're going to be dealing with property, in particular community schemes under COVID. We'll be touching on the regulations, what you can do, what you cannot do, etc. So let me take you through our panel. We've got a panel of experts in property law from Schindler's Attorneys. We have the head of the department, Chantal Gladwin, who'll be presenting today. Chantal has an LLM in advanced property law. She's presently pursuing a PhD at Tux in aspects of municipal and property law. She's the chairperson of the Johannesburg Attorneys Association and the Gauteng Attorneys Association. Chantal lectures at Wits University, and she is the winner of the Lawyer Monthly winner of Women in Law Awards 2019 and 2020, and that's in real estate. Rest assured, I know I am partial, being the managing partner of Schindler's, and she's at Schindler's, but she is the top of her game, at the top of her game, without a close second, without a doubt. Then we have Lisa Schmidt, also in the department at Schindler's Attorneys. Peter Gordon. Now, Peter Gordon is from Engaged Business Turnaround. Engaged are a co-founder of COBRA, business rescue practitioners. They're the guys who get in there and assist you the moment you send us an email, info@cobra.org.za. You'll get guys like him. Lauren Squire, also from Schindler's. Tasneem, also from Schindler's. Emma from IQ Business Group, co-founder of COBRA. Now, they have 700 consultants who are there to assist businesses. What they generally do, and they came in saying that they're going to be dealing with the upper level of companies, businesses. It's actually turned out that the expertise is being applied across the board. It's really been amazing. And then Gary is from Schindler's Attorneys. So we got quite a panel today. Sorry, I missed out Ian Fleming, CEO of Engaged Business Turnaround, and Ayanda, who is from Schindler's Attorneys as well. So we got a super big panel, and a panel of experts. So when it comes to business rescue applies to companies. We at COBRA say that we're about avoiding business rescue, but business rescue is relied upon, and we'll put a company in business rescue if a creditor applies too much pressure, if a creditor is unreasonable. In this environment, more often than not, a creditor would be unreasonable because everybody finds themselves in the same position. So the idea is you jump into COBRA if you're distressed, and we bring the creditor into COBRA and deal with the creditor's creditors. And that's how it's been working, and it's been working really, really well. Now, business rescue applies to companies. As I said, COBRA is about not putting you into business rescue. It's only where there's pressure on the company that it happens. Now, what about partnerships? Partnerships, it doesn't apply, but COBRA can still assist. The same with trusts, and the same with sole proprietorships. But now we have homeowner associations that we're going to be touching on today, and body corporates. How can COBRA assist there? What can COBRA do? And what statutory mechanisms are in place to assist if one finds that there's an unreasonable creditor? So what does one do? One has section 128 onwards of the Companies Act. What does one have when it comes to real estate? So I'm going to hand over to Chantal. Chantal Gladwin, head of our property department. Thanks so much for joining us today, Chantal.
Thanks so much, Maurice. Just to kick off with a very brief introduction to how business rescue applies to community schemes. You have a number of different ways in which community schemes operate. So your most common type of community scheme in South Africa is a sectional title scheme, and this is established in terms of specific legislation, the Sectional Titles Act and the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. Now, you can't put a sectional title scheme into business rescue because it doesn't fall under the definition of a company in terms of the Companies Act. But there is a similar mechanism in the Sectional Titles Act to business rescue that you can use, in terms of which a trustee, or not a trustee, but a business rescue practitioner, listen to me, I'm going around in circles, I apologize, it's very early and I haven't had enough coffee. An administrator is appointed by the court to take over from the existing board of trustees in a sectional title scheme, and they then have wide powers to manage the scheme in order to try and get it back on its feet and to essentially save the scheme and make sure that all of the regulations are complied with, and that the sectional title legislation that is there to govern the scheme, and particularly its finances, is adhered to in order to make sure that all the creditors can be paid. So that's in a sectional title scheme. When it comes to homeowners associations, which is a different kind of community scheme, these are sometimes registered as non-profit organizations in the Companies Office. And to the extent that a homeowners association is a non-profit company, it does fall within the definition of a company in the Companies Act, and it can be put under business rescue in the classical sense. You've got a different type of homeowners association, which is established by common law via constitution. And this in law is a recognized form of body corporate. It has its own juristic independence, but it is not subject to business rescue in terms of the Companies Act. Then you also have community schemes which are established in other manners. So you have share block schemes, which are established in terms of the Share Block Companies Act, and that is a company that can be put under business rescue. Then you have block of flats will fall within the definition of community scheme. But that's only for the purposes of the CSOS Act, the Community Schemes Act, and it doesn't enable you to put a single block of flats which is privately owned under business rescue or into administration, because that's not provided for in our legislation. So that would be dealt with through the ownership of the owner of that block of flats. It might be a company, in which case it would be able to be put under business rescue. It might be an individual owner, in which case different remedies apply. Maurice, can I hand over to Lisa Schmidt, who is going to start the presentation today in relation to the regulation of community schemes?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That would be great. Over to you, Lisa.
Hi, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we can. It's perfect.
Okay, hi, good morning. Okay, today we will be discussing the understanding COVID in community schemes with specific reference to level 4 and level 5 lockdown in community schemes. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of technical issues here. Let me share this one. Okay, sorry about that. Can you all see my screen?
You can see it perfectly now.
Okay. So first of all, throughout these slides, which will probably be sent after, we've used abbreviations. So I'm quickly going to go through the abbreviations so you're all familiar with the terminology. So BC means Body Corporate, MA means Managing Agent, STA means Sectional Titles Act, SMA means Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, and HOA means Homeowners Association. Okay, so as you all know, lawyers love disclaimers. So what is said below is based on the President's statements, on the 23rd of March 2020, the President's address to the nation on the 23rd of April 2020, and the amendments to the Disaster Management Regulations as amended, dated 29th of April 2020, and our interpretation of how the regulations apply to community schemes. So the period of lockdown presently being experienced in South Africa has brought about a lot of uncertainty, especially amongst those living within community schemes. And as you all are aware, the country is now in a graded alert level system and a phased approach. So this means we gradually went from level 5 into level 4, and shortly we will be going into level 3. And different regulations obviously apply at each of these levels. So, application of lockdown rules to community schemes. When you buy a unit in a sectional title scheme, you are purchasing your unit, which is your house, which is your section, together with an undivided share in the common property. So that means you own your unit, but you also own a portion in the common property. And many owners and tenants residing in community schemes have exclusive use areas. Now, what exclusive use areas are they portions of the common property that are exclusively owned by a particular member. So, they reserved exclusively for the rights and use of the particular member, but they are owned by the common property. So just to clarify that, you get exclusive use areas, which are owned by everybody within the scheme, but you as an owner have exclusive use over that section. So during lockdown, owners and tenants living in sectional title schemes who had exclusive use areas were permitted to use those areas. So for example, if you had your section, obviously you were permitted to use your section because you were residing within it, and your exclusive use area, for example, would be your balcony or your patio or your garden. You are permitted to use it. But if you, for example, had an exclusive use area which was not on your property, it is questionable as to whether you are allowed to use that area or not, because that would involve crossing the common property. And in my next slide, I will discuss that further. So owners and tenants were thus prohibited at level 4 and level 5 from using the common property for any other purposes other than those purposes prescribed by the regulations. So this means if you wanted to use the common driveway, for example, you were permitted to do it. If you needed to use the common driveway to go and access essential services, to go to the shops, you would obviously need to go through your common gates and your common driveway. But you weren't permitted, for example, to use the common park to run around, or you weren't permitted to use the common swimming pool or swim in. Obviously, this was to prevent the spread of COVID and to limit contact with other members. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Lauren, who's going to deal with how staff apply in community schemes and whether they were permitted to work or not.
Thank you, Lisa. So like Lisa explained, I'm going to have a look at the requirements in relation to staff of the sectional title and community schemes. And the first slide is specifically in relation to level 5. So it's important to note that the scheme may not compel their staff to attend work during level 5 of lockdown. There is, however, an exception to this rule, and it relates to essential services staff. This would be staff such as security guards, which would be essential for obviously guarding the community scheme and the well-being of the members inside. If a member of the staff does not fit into the criteria of essential services as provided for in the level 5 regulations, it's important to note that that staff member cannot be compelled or permitted to attend work during the lockdown, and any person residing in the scheme or a trustee of the scheme that doesn't live in the scheme but that authorizes someone who isn't deemed as essential to attend to their duties, their employment duties, would be found in contravention of the regulations, and they can be liable for a fine or imprisonment not more than 6 months. It's also important to note that owners and tenants that reside within the scheme cannot compel their staff, such as domestic workers, gardeners, that type of thing, to attend work, as these occupations are not listed as essential services for the purposes of the level 5 regulations. There's an exception to this rule, however. So the exception is where the person, the employee, already lives in the unit where they work. So we're going to explain this a little bit. If a domestic worker, gardener, nanny, anything like that resides in the unit within the community scheme of the owner or tenant concerned, then that person would be able to attend to their duties, as they could do that without crossing any portion of the common property or placing themselves or others at an increased risk of infection. What is actually unlawful is not actually going to work. It is crossing areas of the common property or shared property and actually placing others at risk in that way. So if a domestic worker, gardener or pair, anything like that, resides in an exclusive use area, which actually is classified as common property, but the member pays a levy and has the exclusive use of that area, then that employee would similarly be able to attend to their duties. If one of the staff is required to cross any portion of the common property in order to get to their place of work, so including a stairwell, a lawn, a driveway, then it's important to note that that employee then would not be able to attend work, because it's the actual crossing of the common property that's problematic here. Now we look at staff in relation to level 4. So what the level 4 regulations did is they actually relaxed the level 5 regulations somewhat, but they still are quite, I don't want to say harsh, but they still are quite strict. So the level 4 regulations allow services other than essential workers to commute from their homes to their workplace in order to continue working. It's important to note that they will need a valid permit for this. We're going to go into permits later on in the webinar. So what we've done here is we have looked at the regulations, and we've taken the essential and permitted services that we thought apply to community schemes for you to have a look at. So the services that may return in community schemes are health, social and personal services. This also includes cleaning, sanitation, sewerage, pest control, waste, refuse removal services. Care services, social relief of distress provided to older people, mentally ill persons, persons with disabilities, the sick and children. Medical health, which includes mental health, laboratory and medical services, and private security services. It's also important to note that private households will allow for live-in staff and staff providing care to the sick to be able to be entitled to perform their duties. So now we are going to move on to permits in relation to cleaners and domestic workers at level 4. So cleaners and live-in domestic workers are allowed to carry out their duties, and staff attending to the cleaning of a community scheme are deemed as essential services. This is catered for in what's called the Alert Level 4 table to the Level 4 regulations. It's just basically a part of the regulations that sets out what is deemed essential and what is deemed permitted. Importantly, even though cleaners are deemed as essential, domestic workers are not included in this definition. We've had a lot of questions from members of schemes asking if their domestic worker can commute to work. And it's important to note that they absolutely cannot in terms of level 4 and in terms of level 5. Only domestic workers that actually reside within their section or their units are allowed to attend to work. According to the regulations, cleaning staff and similarly authorized personnel will require a permit that corresponds with Form 2 of Annexure A to the regulations, which must be completed by their employer. So if your cleaning staff, which are allowed to commute to work, want to come to work, you need to make sure that they have that permit, because you don't want them to get in trouble or get into a situation where they come across a roadblock and they then get arrested or fined. Domestic workers will not require permits, as only live-in domestic workers are authorized to continue with their duties during this time. However, for the purposes of returning to work as live-in staff, it's important to note the wording of the section, which we've actually written down there for you to have a look at. Basically, what this means is that permits will be required when they actually go to work initially. So domestic workers who have been at their primary residence are actually allowed to return to their place of work once off, and they then need to stay there. And we would advise that they would then require a permit and possibly even an affidavit from the police station confirming that this is what they're doing. But from there, they will not be able to commute and they will not need a permit thereafter. Can you move to the next slide? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Ayanda, who's going to take you through working staff at level 4. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'll continue with working staff. An important thing about returning staff is that the regulations require that all returning services and industries to have a workplace plan in order to ensure that base services and safety measures are followed. This actually places a number of obligations on the employer themselves to move forward. This requires that body corporates to ensure that adequate workplace plans have all been followed within the community scheme. And this onus kind of shifts to the managing agents to actually employ a type of compliance officer within their company to ensure that the standards of the standard hygiene and health protocols are followed. As mentioned about that, cleaners and domestic workers. Cleaners will fall within the ambit of the phrase of cleaning and sanitation. Accordingly, they will be able to perform the necessary cleaning services within the community scheme. And in addition, they would require these permits to commute from and to work and home each day. As mentioned about the domestic workers who perform cleaning services who do not reside within the community schemes will not be able to commute from work to home each day in order to perform cleaning services for each individual owner or tenant. Only living workers will be allowed to return to work level 4. Working gardeners, on analysis of the regulation, gardeners are not considered to be essential services and accordingly would not be able to acquire any essential permits during this period. Their services are considered to be aesthetic orientated and do not form part of the list of services to return in stage 4. There's an exception, however, that this is where gardening's work is necessary to avoid damage to life or property. In this case, work to be carried out would fall under the next category of workers discussed, namely maintenance workers. Other ground staff and maintenance on the common property. Other ground staff members which are employed for maintenance purposes within the community schemes may only perform services such as waste and refuse removal services during lockdown. It is advisable that each personnel member should carry all these permits to ensure that when they're stopped, they have reasons to commute to and fro from their work. In addition, the workers are allowed to commute, but have to at all times follow strict health protocols such as social distancing, wearing safety masks, and ensuring that there's sanitation equipment around. In addition, maintenance might include the removal of leaves that block gutters, as this is considered waste and also can cause property damage through overflowing gutters, which cause unwanted water ingress if not taken care of. In this regard, other maintenance services such as painting and or repairs on common property, etc., would be only seen as cosmetic in nature and would not be allowed during the stage 4 lockdown unless they are critical. Caretakers who oversee ground staff who perform maintenance on common property would not be able to perform any services other than facilitating and supporting essential services and or returning industries listed in the regulations. As mentioned above by my colleague, private security services will be able to continue throughout all levels of lockdown. Care services have been listed on the regulations to ensure that people with disabilities, families continue to receive these services during lockdown periods in residential facilities, including care centers and community-based facilities. So this includes retirement homes as well, will remain operational as they form part of these essential services. Care services will fall in these categories to ensure that these services continue to run. Plumbing, gas, and electricity services, these do form part of maintenance services and are permitted for emergencies, but burst geysers, pipes, leaks, electrical supply problems. This does not, however, as mentioned above, that does not fall within renovations or completion of construction projects on the property. Working staff who currently reside or who are returning to reside on the sectional title scheme in homeowners association area grounds. As mentioned, all living staff providing such services who reside within community schemes can return to work. However, the regulations do not expressly provide guidelines on how such returning living staff would return, such as whether such staff will be required to further self-quarantine or not. The Minister has emphasized that that containment of movement from household to another household is of the utmost importance. As mentioned above, all COVID health and safety protocols must be followed at all times, as set out in the regulations and determined time by time by the National Department of Health. In this regard, sitting ground staff, domestic workers, cleaning staff, gardeners, and care service workers who usually reside within the community schemes would be able to return to work. Yes, I'll give over to my colleague Lisa Schmidt now, who will continue with movement within the community schemes.
Okay, so during level 5 lockdown, owners and tenants living in sectional title schemes were required to remain within their section, and there was controversy over whether or not they were permitted to use the common property. It was generally accepted that owners and tenants residing in the community scheme were prohibited from using the common property, as we said earlier, other than for purposes other than those prescribed in the regulations. And as said before, the amended regulations aim to ease the lockdown restrictions. The regulations indicate that certain people working in professional services, this is at level 4, who qualify as essential or permitted services, such as bankers, lawyers, etc., may return to work where necessary from the 1st of May 2020. However, they are only permitted to work from 5 to 8 at night. People residing in schemes may only leave their schemes from 5 to 8 at night to purchase goods and obtain services. So the difference between level 4 and level 5, although level 4 seemed to ease the lockdown restrictions, there's now a curfew in which you can obtain those essential services, and you are only permitted to obtain those essential services from 5 in the morning to 8 at night. As said earlier, everyone would still be at level 4 prohibited from participating in organised grouped activities and using the shared communal facilities within a sectional title scheme. Most sectional title schemes either have common pools, gyms or tennis courts, and you would not be permitted, for example, to play tennis with your neighbour, as this would may lead to the spread of COVID and lead to you interacting closely together. So if there are shared communal facilities such as parks and members would like to use these facilities, we suggest that maybe a roster is drawn up by the trustees in which particular times are allocated to each member to avoid them exercising together. Furthermore, owners and tenants residing in schemes should not have visitors or embark on any recreational travel. So that means that visitors would not be permitted to visit you during this time. The regulations now allow for services other than essential services to reopen. So this would mean you would be allowed to have takeaways such as Uber Eats and things like that delivered to your sectional title scheme. Now, there has been a lot of confusion over whether or not deliveries within a community scheme can be delivered to your unit or if they should be delivered to the gate. In this regard, we advise that the trustees, members, and managing agents use their discretion. So, for example, if maybe food is being delivered to your scheme, we suggest it is maybe delivered to the gate of the scheme, the communal gate, and the member comes up to the gate to fetch the food in order to prohibit people from outside coming into the scheme. However, as I said earlier, reasonable discretion needs to be applied. For example, if a member within the scheme has COVID, it would not be advisable for the member to come and fetch medicine that is delivered to the sectional title scheme at the communal gate. The Dischem or Clicks or whoever comes to deliver that medicine should rather come into the scheme and give that owner the medicine to the door of his unit. I'm now going to hand over to Lauren, who's going to show you the differences between level 5 and level 4 in a table.
Thank you, Lisa. So what we've done here is there's obviously quite a few differences, but we have tried to just take the most important, succinct differences and put them in a table for you, and we're going to go through them now. So in terms of level 5, it's important to note that only live-in domestic workers can continue to perform their duties within the section that they reside in. This is obviously as we spoke about earlier, only when they don't have to cross any portion of the community, of the common property to actually attend to their place of work. In terms of level 4, we similarly find that only live-in domestic workers can continue to perform their duties, but there is an exception where they can actually return from their primary residence, where they went to go and have lockdown initially, so they can return to work on a once-off basis, and thereafter they cannot commute. So they must actually live within their workplace to be able to obviously be classified as live-in domestic workers. Next one, level 5 regulations only allows essential service workers to commute from their homes to a workplace, and a valid permit is required. So in terms of level 4, we see a little bit of a relaxation where now other services other than just essential workers, so also permitted workers, can commute from their homes to their workplace in order to continue with their employment. And it's also important to note that in both levels, a permit is required for each. Okay, so, sorry, can you go to the next slide? Thanks. When we look at level 5, we see a very harsh reality where no exercise or movement was allowed on the common property unless members were actually going to access essential services like going to the hospital, if they were essential workers going to work, if you need to go to the grocery store, that kind of thing. But in level 4, we get a relaxation again, but it's only between the hours of 6 and 9 a.m. And here members are actually allowed to exercise on the common property between those times. So you're allowed to actually exercise within 5 kilometers of your house. So you don't have to only exercise on the common property. You can go and exercise on the roads, have a run around, but it must be within 5 kilometers, and it has to be between the times of 6 and 9 a.m. It's also important to note that you cannot exercise in groups and that you must still adhere to social distancing. So in terms of, friends that might live in the same community scheme, even though you are allowed to exercise between 6 and 9 a.m. now, you can't go and arrange with your friend that you're going to go and do a workout on the common property lawns, because that would not be adhering to social distancing practices, and that would be an organized group. So in terms of level 5, it's also important to note that no persons are allowed inside the community scheme unless they're are performing an essential service or they're an occupier of a unit within the scheme. Occupants are allowed to work from home, but they cannot allow members of the public into the community scheme to meet with them. So an essential services worker here that would be allowed into the community scheme is something like a plumber, where a geyser has burst in the scheme and they are authorized by the regulations to come and fix that because it is an emergency and it is an essential service. For the purposes of level 4, persons are allowed to travel and obtain the use of essential and permitted services. So people who want to make use of the professional services offered by those who are working from home within the community scheme must be let into the community scheme area in order to access those services. So it's very important here to note again that it absolutely has to be someone that is actually accessing the services of someone that's classified as permitted or essential. So if you look at something like, just for an example, maybe a doctor or an attorney who is going to commission an affidavit for you, you can't just go into the scheme to maybe get your nails done or to visit a friend, even if that friend is an essential services provider, because it has to be in the course and scope of your work. I'm going to hand over now to Ayanda. Thank you.
Yes. So in light of the above, owners and tenants should ensure to follow the above guidelines to ensure compliance with regulations, which will avoid infringement that can incur a fine and imprisonment. We understand that new regulations and updates do come out almost every second day. That's why understanding and interpreting these regulations is complex in relation to community schemes. However, should managing agents find themselves uncertain of any of these provisions that relates to the conduct of owners and or tenants within the community schemes during this time of lockdown, it is important that they contact our officers who would be able to assist with advising and or drafting of any various notices to owners and tenants to ensure compliance. And I hand over to Chantal. First.
Thanks so much, Ayanda. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Maurice, I just wanted to ask you how you'd like to take questions. Can we carry on and deal with questions at this point?
No. So please, as and when, just jump in. Questions have been posted. As questions come in, deal with them when you feel appropriate.
Thanks very much, Maurice. So the first question came in from Melinda, or it's rather a comment. Melinda said, can we please discuss level 3 too as well? So we are not going to discuss level 3 today because we haven't seen the final gazetted regulations. So I know that there have been a set floating around, and it's ironic because they're marked confidential, but they were obviously leaked. But, we're just not sure if those are final yet. So as soon as we have the final ones, we'll be able to do another webinar on that. So please keep a lookout on the COBRA, the newsletter, and on the Schindler's website to see when we release another webinar on level 3. Then Beverly asks, again, it would be interesting to see the differences between level 4 and level 3, but again, we need to see when the regulations are going to be published, absolutely. And then Sherry has asked, if an owner is ill and cannot go to the shops to buy groceries, would family members or friends be allowed to deliver groceries? And I think this is a very important question because another common issue that we find is not only if a person is ill and cannot go to the shop to buy groceries, but what if you do not have the money to go to the shops and buy groceries? Can your family members or friends or aid organizations deliver food or aid items to your body corporate? I think I'm going to ask Lauren if you would handle this question for us.
Thanks, Chantal. So it's important to note that anything that you do needs to be deemed as essential or permitted. So if you look at the situation where maybe you have an elderly grandmother or an elderly parent, and either they're an at-risk person, so you don't want them to go to the store and actually purchase groceries in case they catch COVID, or maybe they're immobile and you generally would take them groceries anyway. You need to actually obtain a permit and an affidavit from the police station to be able to entitle you to move and to actually take them groceries. You'd also need to show that permit to the community scheme when you're entering. The guards might let you in if you explain what you're doing, but at the end of the day, you're only authorized if you actually have a permit and an affidavit. And I know that that has been quite strictly policed, and there have been a few instances where people were complaining because they were just going to assist their mother, but you absolutely need to then get the correct authority and just fill in a permit, and then you'll be good to go. It would be the same for aid organizations as well. Obviously, they then are actually deemed an essential service, so they just have to have the requisite permits in place.
Thanks so much, Lauren. So can I ask if we can just touch on the issue that you referred to earlier again about when a scheme makes rules to say that visitors aren't allowed into it. That's a fairly common rule to say that visitors aren't allowed in at certain times, or maybe in the early hours of the morning. Can you give us your views on, in light of COVID, what kind of rules would be lawful and what kind of rules wouldn't be, because they are just too strict and they would be violating the rights of the owners of the properties?
Okay, yes. So basically, you need to have a look at the regulations, and the rules of the scheme cannot go over and above what is actually required by law. It cannot actually limit the rights of the members of the scheme more so than the law has done, because that would then be a constitutional infringement. So we got a question a while ago about a retirement village that wanted to limit the times and the amount of days that members could actually go out and, say, buy groceries and that type of thing. And what we advised them is they absolutely could not do that, because even though their intention was honorable and was good because they wanted to limit the exposure to at-risk persons, what they were essentially doing is they were overreaching above the intention of the legislature. in relation to the Disaster Management Act and also the regulations, and they absolutely cannot do that. Similarly, it's also important to note that you can only be fined in sectional title schemes if you actually have in your conduct rules the certain offences and the fines laid out in there. So if you look at things like COVID-19 related offences, if you're getting fined by your sectional title scheme, you're probably going to find that that fine is not consistent with law, because unless there's been a situation where the conduct rules have been amended during COVID, but just because they're probably the fining offences, the finable offences in the conduct rules probably wouldn't be specific enough to cover COVID-19 related offences. So if you have had fines imposed, you need to actually consult with your managing agent and possibly an attorney and refer the matter to CSOS in that regard.
Thanks, Lauren. Can I ask Lisa to jump in here? Lisa, this is such an important question that we get asked so often. When is it lawful for your body corporate or your managing agent to levy a fine on you for conduct that is not in accordance with the regulations? Now, I know, Lisa, you had a very interesting case where a person was fined for touching an elevator button with a part of their body other than their finger. Would you come in and just give us a little bit of a rundown on how you should handle those kinds of situations where you get fined for something that you think is reasonable, but which your body corporate or your managing agent does not think is reasonable?
Okay, so you can only be fined if your rules have a fine or penalty schedule and they actually provide for fining. And those fines also have to be specific, because fines are based on the principles of administrative justice. So in order for someone to fine someone, you need to know what the fine is, the amount of the fine, and what conduct will let you be fined. So you could never, for example, go and fine someone for walking on the common property. You could maybe report them to the police for not following the COVID regulations, but unless your scheme's rules specifically said you will be fined for walking on the common property, which would be unconstitutional and not allowed in any event, only then could you be fined for walking on the common property. So in the case where what happened in a case that I actually dealt with was I had a client who, in light of COVID, didn't want to touch the lift button with his hand for obvious reasons. So he didn't have gloves with him, or it has been advised that you use your elbow, actually by our minister, but he decided to use his foot. And in light of him using his foot, his managing agent sent him a letter stating that he had breached the rules, as he was not entitled to use his foot to access the elevator. And in that case, even though it wasn't the best of conduct, in the circumstances, it was not, I wouldn't say prohibited to use your foot to access the lift, but in any case, he could not be fined because the rules did not state he could be fined. So back to the principle that you cannot be fined for anything that you do unless it is stated in the rules. So even, for example, if you park in a bay that has a red line on it, and it does not state in the rules that you will be fined for parking in that bay with the red line on it, you cannot be fined. Often members in schemes are fined for conduct like this. So before you pay your fines, you must check your rules and see what they state. And if you are fined for conduct that is not mentioned in your rules, you should take it to CSOS and have the case adjudicated upon.
Thanks, Lisa. We have another question from Tessa, and Tessa's asking, where can you obtain a permit? So I think I'm going to ask Ayanda to handle this. And Ayanda, when you answer the question, maybe you can just say what types of permits might be applicable to people who are in community schemes. And what I assume Tessa means, and Tessa, maybe you can give us a bit more clarity just in case I haven't understood your question correctly, is if you need to deliver something to a person who is inside a community scheme, so maybe you're a family member or an aid organization taking food, or perhaps maybe you are going to offer care services to someone in a retirement village, where would you be able to obtain the permits that you need in order to be able to show the security guards at the entrance to the community scheme that you should be let in order to help the people in the scheme?
Thank you, Chantal. Well, according to the regulations, there is a Form 2 of the Annexure A of the regulations, which an employee can fill out to obtain a permit, and as well as going to the police station and making an affidavit to say that they're going to perform this service. Because I understand that there are a lot of vulnerable people in this situation, and they actually need this assistance, as well as older people. And by them actually, by someone who's assisting, they would actually need to just fill out this affidavit or fill out that form specifically, which is attached to the annexures, so that they can have this permission and that they will not be able to be stopped. It's a standard form that any employer that's forming part of the essential service who can fill out for the employee.
Thanks, Ayanda. Thank you so much. If anybody has any further questions, oh sorry, Tessa has responded here. She says for care services or to assist someone. So thank you, Tessa. I think that Ayanda has answered the question. You would, if you are operating in your capacity as an employee of a company, perhaps you're a nurse working with a private nursing care services, then you would ask the head of the institution of your company to please issue you a permit in terms of the form to the regulations that Ayanda mentioned. If, however, you are going in because you are going to help your brother and you are not acting in your capacity as an employee, then you would go down to the police station, as Ayanda indicated, and let them assist you with that. There's another question here from Melinda, thank you. It says, are churches who take care of the poor and needy considered an essential service? So can I ask Lisa, can you help us with that one?
Okay,
Lisa,
well, I know that you're not allowed to have like, you know, conferences or group facilities or things like that. So, but if a church is, for example, which I suppose they're doing in this case, is they providing food to the public and things like that, and you would be permitted to, you could actually obtain a permit and fill in the prescribed form, because it's not as stringent as it was at level 5. At level 5, only if you were working within a company could you actually obtain a service, and for certain services listed in the regulation. So I'd say a church at level 4, if they were providing food, they could maybe get away with obtaining a permit of some kind and giving those people food. However, I don't know if it would be allowed, unless it was passed with the government and things like that, for people to all congregate and sleep within the church, because social distancing wouldn't be adhered to, and that would just, you know, it wouldn't stop the spread of the disease, which is the aim at the end of the day, is to limit contact with each other, and people sleeping in close proximity wouldn't do that. But I'm sure under the regulations, if the prescribed permit was applied for, and if the church was giving over food and essential services, I'm sure that would be allowed.
So Lisa, I can assist a little bit further here in this particular matter. If we're talking about churches or aid organizations, which would include NGOs, or even private organizations, anyone who wants to assist with the provision of food to needy, food or any other type of necessary product. It might be cleaning products, it might be dignitary packs. I've been involved in a number of different initiatives over the last couple of weeks to try and help those in need. So the answer, if you are in Gauteng, is to email the Gauteng government. So there are a couple of directives which have been put out by the Department of Social Welfare, which is the department that's responsible for collating all of this aid all over South Africa. And there's a different email address for each province. And if you give it a Google, you should be able to find the regulations very easily. Sorry, I said regulations, the directions very easily. And you pop an email through to the email address listed. And the guys in Gauteng are very responsive. You give them the details of what area you're delivering the aid to, what type of aid it is, and a list of the beneficiaries. And what they do is they firstly check that there isn't other aid already been delivered to this particular area, to make sure that if there is an overlap, they can assist in reallocating the aid to areas that are in more dire need because they haven't received any assistance yet. And as long as it's not the case that one area is getting a whole lot of aid and other areas aren't, then they will go ahead and give you a permit. And it takes about 3 days to get your permit, and they physically issue it to you over email, and you can take it along and make sure that when you are doing whatever you need to do to deliver your aid, you don't get in trouble. The other thing you need to remember in relation to these permits is that you need to carry your ID with you, because if you are stopped by police or the army or anyone else, you need to make sure that you are able to show identification to prove that you are the person specifically mentioned in that permit. I know a couple of people have had a problem with that because they forget to take identification, because we run out the house and we've got all of our charity things, and we've got our permits, and we've got our hand sanitizer, and we've got our masks, and we've got a bucket load full of rice, but we forget to take our IDs. So yes, that was me. Nobody picked that up. We have another question, and I'm going to ask Ayanda to address this. So thank you, Peter, so much for asking the question. It is, why is there a distinction between the regulations in relation to domestic workers and gardeners? So I assume here, this is where we were explaining that a gardener who lives in the scheme is not going to be able to return to work under level 4 because they're not in essential service. But a domestic worker who lives in the scheme and maybe doesn't travel to reach the unit of their employer, or might travel to reach the unit of their employer if their employer is an essential service provider under level 4. Why is there a difference between a domestic worker and a gardener in terms of the regulations? Ayanda, can you address that for us?
Yes, sure. So as mentioned previously, gardeners in their work is aesthetic in nature, and for them not to load the lawns may not seem as an emergency currently, however, as a domestic worker who lives in the community scheme and who's available, would be able to assist with other care services and other cleaning services that are offered there as well. So gardeners specifically, it's just, unless there's a tree branch about to fall on a fence or something like that, because we have had certain situations like that where a gardener has had to come in to ensure that certain tree filings are done in order to avoid further damage to property. So it's more looking at a case-by-case basis, and I think this is a very important thing that all community schemes should take each situation on a case-by-case basis to assess whether the emergency of the situation is, and whether it can really fall within the required regulations.
Thanks, Ayanda. I'm going to ask Lauren. Lauren, in the beginning, when Maurice introduced the topic, we spoke just a little bit about how the different types of community schemes might be given assistance through COBRA, depending on how they are created in law. So a homeowners association, you might be able to put under business rescue if it's a company, but if it is a juristic person which is established by constitution in terms of common law, you wouldn't be able then, I think, to use the Companies Act to help.
You know what, Chantal?
Yes?
I prefer to steer the discussion towards Chantal and I have recently been involved in a matter which involves the owner. So the home owner is a company, okay? And if Peter's on, Peter, I'd like to also have a discussion with you and just hear like your views on a business rescue in relation to a residential property owned by a company. Now, we know the Oakdean judgment, and we know that it's not considered a business. But for the purpose of a better return to creditors, have you ever dealt with anything like that? Peter or Ian?
Maurice, no, I haven't. But look, I mean, excuse me, the Act is quite clear. I mean, it applies to companies and excuse me, to closed corporations. So I can't. And remember, you're in business rescue. You're always trying to beat the liquidation valuation. But the essential part of business rescue is to hand back a sustainable and financially sustainable and solvent company. And if you can achieve that, notwithstanding what the assets are that are in that company, then I would argue that it can be placed in rescue.
Yeah, and I think that's quite interesting. So would it be advisable then for body corporates to actually apply to put the companies into business rescue so that they can actually deal with the asset for the purpose of settling creditors? I'll be curious to see whether that actually becomes more common. But it is then an option for a body corporate, as opposed to liquidating. It's an option they can consider placing the property owning company into business rescue. And it could be in and out. It could be relatively quick as well.
Yeah, look, sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, the other important thing is, remember, the business rescue practitioner has full rights to take any legal action he decides he needs to take against defaulters. So if you have got a body corporate and you've got members of the body corporate who are not paying their levies, there's nothing to stop the practitioner taking full legal action against them to recover outstanding levies.
Sure. And I'm thinking there's another potential benefit to the body corporate applying for business rescue, and that is that if the body corporate applies and places the property owning residential company into business rescue, the business rescue practitioner can immediately raise finance to settle the debts whilst they're looking at selling the property, secure the finance, and get a super preference through post-commencement finance. So for the viewers out there, if a company is in business rescue and the business rescue practitioner raises finance and uses as collateral security owned by the company, you get super preference. So the lender will almost certainly be paid back. Hey, Peter, I mean, this we could see quite a bit of this now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the other interesting thing is I had connection with a body corporate where each of the units were in a separate company. So these 30 odd units, and they're all in separate companies. And I mean, the interesting thing there is the body corporate is an affected party because it's owed money and what we've had from some of the companies is that the company itself is not responsible for the recovery. There's 10 shareholders in each company. So 10 shareholders having a number of weeks a year, typical sort of holiday home type structure. And the argument was the tenants, the companies said that they weren't responsible for recovering the levies. It was the body corporate's responsibility. And the body corporate's currently in a debate, but it's quite an interesting point because the body corporate would quite like the idea of just applying to have the company placed in rescue and take control of all 10 of these recalcitrants, even if it's only one or two of them that aren't paying, to then recover the levies through rescue. And if needs be, remember that in rescue, you can sell the asset. So you could even end up selling the unit, much to the horror of the other owners.
And this is what happens when you take a commercial attorney and have a commercial attorney work together with a real estate attorney. And that's what recently happened with Chantal and I. It was a body corporate, and the commercial side of it was the consideration of whether to actually go the business rescue route. Anyway, I don't know, Chantal, do you have anything to add?
I think that the idea of putting a business rescue practitioner in to assist entities that are unable to pay levies might be levies to a body corporate, or it might be levies to a homeowners association, which is itself actually a company that could itself be put under business rescue. I think it opens up a whole world of options that are not available and which are not traditionally looked at by trustees and by directors of these community schemes. It's something that we really need to start investigating because it's a brave new world out there, and we need new solutions for new problems that we've never faced before.
Sure. Well, that's it. That's a wrap for today's show. We have shows every day. Sometimes we have shows twice a week. So just look out go to our website and see what's coming up. So thanks to my panelists. Thanks to the audience. Thanks for the questions. It was really good today to have the kind of engagement that we did. So please join us. Go to the COBRA website, www.cobra.org.za, or send an email to info@cobra.org.za. Thanks all. Goodbye.